The ABC studio fell silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly adjusted her microphone, her composed demeanor contrasting sharply with Billy Joel's increasingly visible agitation. The renowned pianist and songwriter had spent the previous 10 minutes criticizing congressional oversight of music industry practices, specifically targeting Crockett's proposed legislation on royalty reform. With all due respect, Congresswoman, Joel had declared moments earlier, politicians with no understanding of artistic creation have no business dictating how musicians should be compensated for their work. The tension was palpable as Crockett looked directly at Joel, her expression resolute but measured. Mr. Joel, before we continue discussing compensation ethics, I think it's important to address your repeated claims about family values in the music industry. She held up a document bearing an official court seal. I have here your testimony from your 2009 divorce proceedings where you stated under oath the exact opposite of what you're advocating for today. The camera caught Joel's expression transforming from confidence to visible shock. As Crockett continued, you testified that artists should be held to the same ethical standards as any other professional and specifically supported the very regulations you're now condemning. Joel's face flushed as he gripped the edge of the table, the studio audience murmuring in surprise. This unexpected confrontation between a music legend and a freshman congresswoman instantly transformed what was supposed to be a routine discussion about music industry regulations into a pivotal moment that would reshape the national conversation about celebrity advocacy and political consistency. What happened next left viewers stunned and immediately went viral across social media platforms. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to see more moments when prepared leadership meets celebrity advocacy. Before this explosive confrontation, Billy Joel and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had traveled very different paths through American public life. Billy Joel, 74, had built his legendary status in American music over 5 decades of hit songs and memorable performances. With multiple Grammy Awards, induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and over 150 million records sold worldwide, Joel had established himself as one of the most successful singer-songwriters in recording history. His classics like Piano Man, Uptown Girl, and We Didn't Start the Fire have become part of America's cultural fabric. In recent years, Joel had become increasingly outspoken on issues affecting the music industry, particularly regarding digital streaming compensation, copyright protection, and industry ethics. His foundation had supported music education programs, and he had leveraged his celebrity to advocate for traditional industry structures that had launched his own career. The music business gave me everything, Joel often stated in interviews. I believe in protecting the systems that allow musicians to build sustainable careers. This perspective had made him a respected voice on industry issues, with politicians from both parties seeking his endorsement for their positions on arts and entertainment policy. Less known to the public was Joel's complex personal history with the issues he now championed. His career had encompassed multiple marriages, business disputes, and legal challenges that sometimes contradicted his public advocacy positions. These contradictions generally went unexamined in media appearances, where celebrity status and musical accomplishments typically took center stage. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, represented a different American narrative. After graduating with honors from the University of Houston Law Center, she had built her reputation as a civil rights attorney before entering politics. Elected to Congress in 2022, Crockett had been appointed to the House Judiciary Committee and its subcommittee on courts, intellectual property, and the Internet. What many observers didn't realize was that before law school, Crockett had worked for a performing rights organization, giving her first-hand experience with music licensing and royalty systems. During law school, she had specialized in entertainment law and had written her thesis on digital rights management. These experiences provided her with technical knowledge of the industry that exceeded that of many of her congressional colleagues. Effective policy requires understanding both the human and technical dimensions of an industry, Crockett had explained when introducing her Music Modernization Reform Act. We need regulations that protect artists while adapting to technological realities. The tension between Joel and Crockett had begun when her proposed legislation sought to update royalty distribution systems to benefit independent artists, while imposing new transparency requirements on industry executives and established musicians with publishing catalogs. Several prominent artists, including Joel, had publicly criticized the bill as unnecessary interference in industry practices. The ABC special program, American Creators, Rights and Responsibilities, had been designed to bring together voices from both the creative and regulatory sides of the entertainment industry. The producers had specifically sought Joel's participation because of his outspoken stance against Crockett's proposed reforms. What the producers hadn't anticipated was how thoroughly Crockett had prepared for this encounter. While others might have approached the discussion with general policy points, Crockett had methodically researched Joel's history of public statements, legal testimonies, and business arrangements. Her staff had identified numerous instances where his current advocacy positions directly contradicted his previous statements and actions, particularly in legal proceedings where he had been under oath. Most significantly, they had discovered court records from Joel's 2009 divorce proceedings where he had testified extensively about industry ethics and regulatory needs, testimony that directly contradicted his current public stance. These records, while technically public, had never been examined in the context of Joel's advocacy work. As the segment began that evening, viewers were expecting a typical exchange between a beloved musical icon and a relatively unknown politician. What they witnessed instead was a rare moment of accountability, where thorough research and careful preparation would challenge the assumption that celebrity authority should go unexamined in policy discussions. The studio lights gleamed off the polished table where Billy Joel and Congresswoman Crockett sat opposite each other. Moderator Diane Sawyer introduced a segment on music industry regulation with practiced neutrality. Our focus tonight is on proposed legislation that would significantly change how music royalties are distributed and how the industry operates, she began. Mr. Joel, you've been quite vocal in your opposition to these reforms. Could you explain your concerns? Joel leaned forward with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. The music industry is a unique creative ecosystem that has developed over decades. The proposed regulations show a fundamental misunderstanding of how artists create and how the business actually functions. Politicians with limited experience in creative fields shouldn't be imposing arbitrary rules on an industry they don't fully understand. Congresswoman Crockett, you're the primary sponsor of this legislation, Sawyer pivoted. How do you respond to these concerns from industry veterans? I appreciate Mr. Joel's perspective, Crockett began, and I certainly respect his extraordinary contributions to American music. However, the current system disproportionately benefits established artists while creating significant barriers for independent musicians. Our legislation simply updates royalty systems to reflect how music is actually consumed today. Joel shook his head slightly. With all due respect, Congresswoman, these updates impose burdensome reporting requirements on artists and undermine the contractual relationships that have allowed musicians like me to focus on creating rather than administrative paperwork. The reporting requirements only apply to royalty collections exceeding $10 million annually, Crockett clarified. Would you consider that threshold burdensome for most working musicians? That's not the point, Joel replied, his tone sharpening. Today it's $10 million. Tomorrow it could be $1 million or $100,000. Government regulation tends to expand once the door's opened. The fundamental issue is whether politicians should be dictating terms to an artistic community. Crockett nodded thoughtfully. That's an important principle to consider. Would you say you consistently oppose government involvement in artistic industries throughout your career? Absolutely, Joel stated firmly. Artists need freedom to create and manage the business aspect of their work without excessive regulation. That's interesting, Crockett said, opening a folder on the table before her. Because in 2009, you testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee in support of the Performance Rights Act, specifically arguing that government oversight is essential to ensure fair compensation for all artists. You stated that without regulatory frameworks, powerful industry players will always exploit those with less leverage. That seems to directly contradict your position today. Joel shifted in his chair. That was a different context. The Performance Rights Act addressed a specific imbalance in radio royalties. The imbalance you're referring to primarily affected established artists like yourself, Crockett noted. You supported regulation when it benefited your interest, but opposed it when it might benefit newer artists at a potential cost to established musicians. Is that a fair assessment? That's an oversimplification, Joel responded, a defensive edge entering his voice. Each piece of legislation has unique implications. My concern has always been protecting the creative process. I understand, Crockett replied. Let's discuss the family values component of your testimony today. You mentioned that your opposition to the transparency requirements stems partially from your belief that family matters should remain private. You suggested that revealing certain financial arrangements could harm artists' families. Is that an accurate summary? Yes, Joel confirmed. Artists' family lives should be protected from unnecessary public scrutiny. Crockett nodded. I completely agree that family privacy is important. That's why I was surprised to find your sworn testimony from your 2009 divorce proceedings where you argue precisely the opposite position. She removed a document from her folder. When your ex-wife's attorney asked about financial privacy, you stated, and I quote directly from the court transcript, "Public figures who benefit from their public status should expect financial transparency. The same standards that apply to corporate executives should apply to successful musicians." You further testified that hiding behind family privacy to shield financial arrangements is ethically indefensible. A murmur spread through the studio audience as Joel's expression tightened. Divorce proceedings are contentious. Statements made in that context don't necessarily reflect broader policy positions. That's certainly understandable, Crockett acknowledged. Positions can evolve. What's striking, though, is that you presented your current position on family privacy as a long-standing principle rather than a recent evolution. In fact, you've made similar arguments in multiple contexts when it served your interests and the opposite argument when it didn't. She turned to another document. In 2015, when advocating for the Songwriter Equity Act, you specifically argued that transparency requirements strengthen the industry's integrity. Yet today, you're arguing that similar transparency provisions would damage the industry. Joel's composure began to visibly fray. Congresswoman, you're cherry-picking statements from different contexts to create contradictions. These are complex issues that can't be reduced to sound bites. I agree completely that context matters, Crockett responded. That's why I've reviewed the full transcripts of your testimonies, interviews, and advocacy statements over the past 15 years. The context doesn't eliminate the contradictions. It actually highlights a pattern where your stated principles shift depending on how the specific policy affects your financial interests. The tension in the studio was palpable as viewers witnessed something rarely seen in celebrity interviews: methodical accountability for inconsistent positions. Crockett wasn't attacking Joel personally. She was simply presenting his own words and asking him to reconcile them with his current advocacy. Mr. Joel, she continued, when you testified under oath during your divorce proceedings, you specifically addressed artist compensation ethics. You stated that established artists have a responsibility to ensure the system works for all musicians, not just those who have already succeeded. Today, you're arguing against provisions designed precisely to help emerging artists. How do you reconcile these positions? The decisive moment came when Joel, visibly frustrated by Crockett's persistent questioning, abandoned his measured tone. "This is exactly what's wrong with politics today," he exclaimed, his voice rising sharply. "Digging through divorce records from 15 years ago instead of addressing the actual policy issues. These personal attacks don't contribute to meaningful discussion." The outburst hung in the air. Several audience members looked uncomfortable at the sudden shift in tone. Crockett remained perfectly composed, her response measured but firm. "Mr. Joel, I haven't made any personal attacks," she said calmly. "I've simply quoted your own words stated under oath that directly contradict your current testimony. This isn't about your personal life. It's about consistency in public advocacy. When someone testifies before Congress about what principles should guide our legislation, the American people deserve to know whether those principles change depending on whose interests are at stake." She turned toward the audience. "This isn't about Mr. Joel specifically. It's about a broader pattern where celebrity advocates are rarely held to standards of consistency that we would expect from other policy voices. When industry representatives testify about regulations, we should examine whether their positions reflect consistent principles or merely their current interests." Joel attempted to regain his composure. "My positions have evolved based on changing industry conditions. That's not inconsistency. It's adaptation. Evolution in thinking is perfectly reasonable," Crockett agreed. "But your testimony today presented your position on artistic freedom and regulatory interference as unchanging principles rather than recent adaptations. You specifically criticized me and other members of Congress for not understanding these supposedly timeless principles of artistic independence. principles that your own sworn testimony shows you didn't always hold. Moderator Diane Sawyer, recognizing the significance of the exchange, asked, "Mr. Joel, would you like to address the specific contradictions Congresswoman Crockett has identified?" Joel's response revealed how thoroughly the dynamic had shifted. "I've been in this industry for over 50 years, he said, his tone defensive rather than authoritative. "My perspectives have naturally evolved as the business has changed. Perhaps I should have acknowledged that evolution more explicitly." This concession, acknowledging that his positions had changed rather than representing timeless principles, marked a significant retreat from his earlier framing of the debate as between those who understood artistic freedom like himself and those who didn't like Crockett. "I appreciate that acknowledgement," Crockett responded. "Evolution in thinking is natural and often valuable. My concern wasn't that your positions have changed. It's that today's testimony presented those positions as self-evident truths rather than evolved perspectives, and specifically questioned the legitimacy of differing viewpoints based on experience." She gathered her documents. "I believe we can have a more productive conversation about music industry regulation if we focus on current evidence about how different systems affect various stakeholders, rather than appeals to authority or experience that may not reflect consistent principles." As the segment concluded, the transformation was complete. What had begun as a typical discussion featuring a beloved musician lecturing a politician about artistic freedom had become a thoughtful examination of consistency and evidence in policy advocacy. As the cameras prepared to cut away, Joel made one final attempt to reassert control of the narrative. "I've dedicated my life to music," he said. "My only concern is protecting the creative process for future generations." "I believe you," Crockett replied sincerely. "And I hope you can believe that despite my different perspective, my goal is also to create a system where creativity can flourish, for established artists like yourself, and for those still working to build their careers." This respectful conclusion left viewers with something more valuable than the confrontational gotcha moment they might have expected. Instead, they witnessed a rare example of how evidence-based accountability can lead to more honest policy discussions, even when celebrities are involved. The repercussions of the exchange between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Billy Joel extended far beyond the ABC studio. Within hours, clips of the confrontation had spread across social media platforms, generating millions of views and extensive commentary. Major news outlets framed the story in ways that captured its unexpected significance. "Joel confronted with his own words in music policy debate," read the Washington Post headline. NPR produced a segment titled, "When Public Advocacy Meets Personal History, Joel and Crockett's Policy Exchange." Music publications like Billboard covered the exchange with headlines like, "Piano Man Faces Policy Paradox, Joel's Regulatory Reversals Exposed." Media analysts noted the unusually substantive nature of the exchange. What made this confrontation compelling wasn't celebrity drama, but watching evidence-based accountability in action, explained media critic Carlos Ramirez. Crockett didn't attack Joel personally. She simply presented his own words and asked him to reconcile them with his current positions. The confrontation sparked renewed interest in celebrity testimony on policy matters. Several news organizations began investigating the consistency of other high-profile advocates' positions, finding numerous examples of similar contradictions that had previously gone unexamined. Congressional committees updated their witness preparation guidelines to include more thorough reviews of previous testimony and public statements. For Joel, the professional consequences were significant but nuanced. While some fans criticized Crockett for what they viewed as an ambush, many others expressed appreciation for her respectful but firm approach to accountability. Joel's upcoming appearance at a congressional roundtable on copyright reform was quietly postponed. Though his concert performances continued to sell out as before, 2 weeks after the confrontation, Joel addressed the situation during a concert at Madison Square Garden. "I've spent 50 years writing songs about human complexity," he told the audience. "I shouldn't have been surprised to discover I'm pretty complex myself. Sometimes our principles evolve, and that's okay, as long as we're honest about it." This acknowledgement of his inconsistency, delivered with characteristic charm, helped rehabilitate his image as a thoughtful artist rather than merely a defensive celebrity. For Congresswoman Crockett, the aftermath brought increased attention to her legislative work. Her Music Modernization Reform Act gained several new co-sponsors, and industry publications that had previously dismissed her proposals began engaging with their substantive details rather than simply quoting celebrity critics. Invitations to speak at music industry events increased significantly, with organizers specifically citing her detailed knowledge of industry structures. What Representative Crockett demonstrated wasn't just good preparation, noted music industry attorney Jennifer Lawrence. It was a commitment to substance over celebrity that should serve as a model for policy discussions. She didn't dismiss Joel's experience. She simply asked for consistency in how that experience informed his advocacy. Perhaps most significantly, the confrontation influenced how media outlets approached discussions of industry regulation. Producers reported increased emphasis on research into advocates' previous positions rather than simply presenting their current statements as authoritative. Several networks updated their preparation guidelines for hosts interviewing policy advocates, specifically noting the importance of identifying potential contradictions in past positions. The public response revealed a sophisticated understanding of the issues at stake. Comment sections and social media discussions showed unusual depth, with citizens across political divides expressing appreciation for substantive engagement rather than performative conflict. What resonated with viewers wasn't seeing a politician win against a celebrity, explained communications professor Sarah Jenkins. It was watching someone prioritize evidence over authority, demonstrating that in a healthy democracy, even the most beloved voices should be held to standards of consistency. In her district office a month after the confrontation, Crockett reflected on its significance during an interview with her local newspaper. "This was never about embarrassing Mr. Joel, whom I genuinely respect as an artist," she explained. "It was about ensuring that our policy discussions are grounded in consistent principles rather than fluctuating positions based on self-interest." She continued, "Celebrity can bring valuable attention to important issues, but that attention is only useful if it leads to substantive, evidence-based policy discussions. When we're making decisions that affect thousands of working musicians, we need to focus on systematic evidence rather than anecdotal experience, even from the most successful artists." When asked if she had anticipated the viral nature of the exchange, Crockett smiled. "My focus was on establishing a factual record to inform our committee's work. The public response has been encouraging. It suggests that people are hungry for substance over celebrity in our policy discussions." The legacy of the confrontation continues to resonate in discussions about the role of celebrity in public policy. Georgetown University professor Robert Chun perhaps captured its significance most succinctly. "What we witnessed wasn't just a compelling television moment. It was a demonstration that in a healthy democracy, evidence and consistency should matter more than fame or charm, regardless of how much we might enjoy someone's music." For citizens watching at home, the confrontation offered something increasingly rare in public discourse. A moment where thorough preparation visibly overcame star power, where substance trumped celebrity, and where the strength of evidence proved more important than the strength of reputation. As one widely shared comment on the viral clip observed, "I've been a Billy Joel fan for 40 years, and I still am. But watching someone hold him accountable with his own words reminded me that democracy works best when we evaluate ideas based on their merit, not on who delivers them." If you found this analysis of accountability and public discourse valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of how our democratic institutions function in practice. Share your thoughts in the comments about the proper role of celebrities in policy discussions. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you content that matters.